Hi, this is Osteria, the digital book reader, and since it's the first week in February, I thought I'd talk about the books I read last month. So, my goal in 2024 is to read 24 books this year. January, I was able to get through 5 books, and the 5 books that I was able to get through, I'll kind of talk about a little bit. The first book I want to talk about is The Trials of Hercules. This is by Tammie Painter, and it is an alternate take on Greek mythology. I know it sounds a little convoluted, but basically what happened was it's post-apocalyptic in a way. We kind of destroyed ourselves and threw ourselves into the Dark Ages. And when we threw ourselves into the Dark Ages, the Olympian gods decided to come back. So these stories take place centuries after that event, so they're pretty much well enmeshed into their roles and relationships. And it kind of redoes a lot of Greek mythology in that world. I'm a huge mythology fan of all types, so anytime I see an alternate take on mythology, I'm usually a big fan. I'll give it a try right away. For this book, it was good. It didn't blow me away. I would generally say for this book, I would say if you're a big fan of mythology, definitely read this book. One thing I liked, if you're a big fan of mythology, is this book kind of breaks each chapter down into a different person's point of view, so you can kind of see what all of them are thinking. So if you're kind of a fan of mythology, it's nice to kind of see what Hercules was thinking, what Iolaus was thinking, what all the different characters, what Hera was thinking, what all the different characters were thinking. So on my stars, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give this 3 stars. I'm giving it 3 stars. I'm giving it 3 stars because it was a good read. Wasn't the best read, but definitely if you're a mythology fan, I would say you'd enjoy this book. This is a kind of book where I enjoyed it. I'll probably read the rest of the series, but they weren't good enough that I'll kind of like must read them right away and push out other books that I might have an interest in. Next book I read was Bookshops Bonedust, and this book was amazing. It was just amazing, and it was just like this wonderful story of friendship and day-to-day mundania with a little bit of action and excitement. It just was a really good story, and it really sounds silly when I mention it out loud, that basically it's the story of a young mercenary. Her name is Viv, and she gets injured, and she basically has to rehab her wound in a town. And when she's rehabbing her wound, she makes friends with this I believe they're called Ratkin, who runs this bookstore. And the story is really just about her and this Ratkin working together to kind of help build the reputation and success of the bookstore back up. So it's nothing world building, but it was just really well written. The friendships and the relationships, it just was really well written, so that the next time Travis Baldree comes out with a book like this, I will snatch it up. Rating this book, I would definitely give this book 5 stars. This is a book that anybody who's into fantasy would enjoy. I would say the only reason you might not enjoy this book is if you're into very big, high stakes, world spanning, deep century spanning type fantasy. Maybe this book might not be for you. Bookshops Bonedust, for me, definitely 5 stars. Next book I read was the sequel to The Trials of Hercules, which was the Voyage of Heroes, which basically was the journey of the Argos. with Jason and Odysseus and that whole crew. And this was a good book. I think I kind of like this similarly to Hercules. It didn't blow me away, but it definitely got my good mythology behind the scenes Jones off. One of the things I really liked about this book is how they depicted Jason. I mean, you think of these guys as these incredibly brave, smart heroes, and their depiction of Jason kind of is cool in the way that they chose to do it. So for this book, once again, it's a 3. Like I said, I'm definitely going to be reading more in the series, but it wasn't good enough that I have to jump to do it right now. So this book is going to get a 3 with me. Next book I read is the Tao Te Ching. The Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. It's written by Lao Tzu, but the interpretation of the translation of the Tao Te Ching, I think that's right, Tao Te Ching, is done by Ursula K. Le Guin, and I'm a big science fiction and fantasy fan, so when I saw that she did the interpretation of the translation, I was very interested to see what was going on. I kind of have to say, not my cup of tea. I mean, I'm definitely not a philosophy book person. Once again, kind of trying to stretch my boundaries. I did and one of my favorite books is The Tao of Pooh, but to me, they're just very different books. The Tao of Pooh made it very relatable, and I kind of lived by my life by the things that I read and I got out of The Tao of Pooh. But that was one person's interpretation, and it really resonated with me. This book was basically just the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu, and she just kind of picked wording that she liked. It was stilted, it was boring, it wasn't terribly relevant, just wasn't for me. And once again, that makes sense. I'm not a big philosophy person, I'm not a big religion person, so this just wasn't something I saw the deeper meaning in. So for me, I have to say, as far as me reading it, as far as me enjoying it, I got through it because it was short, but for me, I'm going to be a little bit generous, mainly just by kind of admitting that maybe it was just over my head, but still, I got to give it 2 stars. So the last book that I read was The Blue Fairy Book by Andrew Lang. Now, The Blue Fairy Book is one of many fairy books by Andrew Lang, which are kind of a collection of fairy tales. Most people who are mythology fans are low-key fairy tale fans too, because they're kind of, mythology and fairy tales really go hand in hand in a lot of ways. So I do kind of like to read fairy tales, and so I thought I'd give this a try. Just kind of aside, when my niece was growing up, between the ages of, I would say, like 9 and 12, maybe 9 and 13, every year I would give fairy books as part of her birthday gifts. I mean, they were cheap books, so I would give her that and then another, like, real gift. But every year I gave her one of these, and like the first 2 years, she was big into fairy tales. She read them, and then she kind of lost interest too. And that's really the biggest issue with the Blue Fairy books, and the Blue Fairy book and all of the fairy books, is that fairy tales are formulaic, and reading the original or the earlier takes on some of these fairy tales, on Cinderella, on Alibaba and the 40 Thieves, Aladdin and the Lamp, reading some of those earlier takes, you realize that they're not terribly well written, and they're terribly formulaic. And I think a lot of it is that these probably were meant to be spoken, and somebody put them down in writing, and it doesn't really translate that well as written work. So it's just very kind of rote tales. It was interesting to read, to kind of read the earlier versions of these fairy tales, to kind of see how they did it and what they talked about. But once again, it was more like reading kind of a textbook, in that it wasn't really like reading I was kind of like enjoying and laughing out loud. It was interesting. I was wondering if after I read this book, if I would be interested in reading the other fairy books, and the answer to that is no. I'm good. The Blue Fairy book was good for me. You know, sometimes you read older books and you realize that writing has really evolved over the years, and you know, there are so many great writers now, where 80 years ago there were people who retold stories, and they did it to the best of their ability, but it wasn't really done in a way to bring enjoyment to the reader. It was really more done in a way to keep a record of stories told in olden days past. So, Blue Fairy book, if you're a fairy tale fan, then I definitely think that this book would be of interest to you. So, just for that, and because, you know, I feel like any fairy tale fan should read some of the Blue Fairy books. I mean, some of the fairy books, and the Blue Fairy is the first one. I'm going to give this a 3. It wasn't my cup of tea, and it was a little formulaic, but I just kind of feel like it is required reading if you're a person who's into fairy tales. So, that's pretty much it. Those are my books that I made it through for January. Voyage of Heroes, the Tao Te Ching, the Trials of Hercules, Bookshops and Bonedust, and the Blue Fairy book. So, every month, usually the first week of every month, I'll be talking about the books I read the prior month, and just my takes, and I'll go ahead and be talking a little bit about them, giving what I rated them as from 1 to 5 stars. And actually, now I think about it, I probably should be doing another video, which I will, which is what my ratings mean, what a 1 star really means for me, and what a 5 star really means for me. So I'll probably talk about that in a video this month. But that's it. This is the Digital Reader, Ofori, and keep reading.